Yo, if I'm gonna keep it a bean, we don't know what community is anymore. It's sad. Welcome back to another episode of Keeping It a Bean with Quise. If you don't know, my name is Marquise Davon. Quise, Marquise, this American Negro, whatever you want to call me, just never call me Mark, please. Okay? So, Keeping It a Bean is a show where I essentially just want to talk around anything and everything over just a cup of coffee. It doesn't have to be overly produced of an episode. It is just casual conversation on just how my mind flows, but why not invite everybody else into some of my favorite places to have a conversation is in a coffee spot or over a cup of coffee. Let's begin. Today, we're going to talk around community care. I think community care is something important because we live in such a world that feels individual. In a world where the world should be so much more connected than what it is, we're not. And I've been so curious around like what is this issue that we are experiencing? Why is American individualism like messing people up? You feel me? And messing up communities and knowing how to navigate what that looks like, right? And that to me is it's sad, and I want to figure out how do we frame it in a way that can help us get back to making more intentional community and almost framing it in like how do we take our silos of friends, habits that we develop with friends, and then expand that into like the community overall. So before we get started, American individualism, it allows and encourages people to create their own lifestyle that they hope that will lead to happiness and accomplishments. Their expression is not obligated to conform to societal norms or follow in their parents' footsteps. Now, I do believe that it's also the idea that we have to be a little bit more self-reliant and we have to put individual rights above anything else. So the value of personal achievement and success comes for those who have worked harder. So American individualism comes right from capitalism. We already know what this is, right? And so for me, I wanted to make sure that we're anchoring it in that understanding and definition because I do think that this is a leading cause as to why community does not exist in a way that it should anymore, in a way that it can still go. And so I'll start with like my own upbringing, and then I'll lead into my how I form community, what I do within my friendships, how my friend groups function, and then go into like how does this translate to the greater world, the rest of the world, right? So all of that's going to be super important as we enter this conversation. And I want to start us off with just my personal space. Like, I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania. It was a low income area. We were in the most impoverished city at some point in time. And it's a small city, 88,000 people. But we've all experienced, like, the harshness of poverty. And when I think around the community that I grew up with, I was having this conversation. I was just like, I don't think that I've ever looked at like a tit for tat necessarily of like community doing nice things for each other and us expecting something in return. It was this like known idea that we're all kind of in a really crappy situation together. And so what does it look like for us to not have to experience the worst parts of being at the bottom of capitalism, right? The haves and the have-nots, the system that drives competition and it encourages you to work harder than everybody else. And then if you work the hardest, then you will then lead a life that is, then you have earned a life that's worth living or a life that is at meeting all your needs, whatever the case may be, right? As we engage in this piece of the conversation. And so it made me think around like, being able to go ask my neighbors for sugar. It's going around being able to go and say, yo, we're out of toilet paper. Can I use a roll of toilet paper? Going to my friend's house and knowing that like I'm going to go there and eat a hot meal or something like that. I'm not saying that we didn't have hot meals all the time, but it is just knowing that like this is an opportunity for us to have other spaces to be taken care of and not just having to solely rely on parents and knowing these situations like a single parent having to work a job or two jobs, second shift, third shift, parents aren't able to always show up in that way, and it's not their fault. It's just the way that the cards have been dealt and how we just have to navigate. So for me, I really did grow up with like so many different friends where we were all able to just show up for each other in different things that we may need, whether that was a place to sleep, whether it was a place to de-stress, whether it was a space to just talk, you know? And so as I am thinking around my own matriculation into adulthood, into understanding the kind of environment that I grew up in, it is also being able to note that though we were in crappy situations, we made sure that we all had each other as a cushion. I'm not saying it worked like that all the time, because, you know, some families are just like, you keep your business your business, you keep that behind closed doors, you don't let anybody else into your business. And so it did create a space where you may not have always been able to be emotionally vulnerable with everybody. And I had to pick and choose when I want to tell my family's business or not, right? Because I didn't want it to look bad on my mom. I didn't want to look bad on my family, because that information can be weaponized and get people taken away from families, be like, how are you living like this and this, that, and the third. And for me, I just want to be mindful of that when I was growing up. So there were days where I couldn't always vent, but there were days where I'm just like, I just need a good talk, right? And just be able to navigate or be able to be frustrated and angry. And my friends served as that space of communal and emotional care for me. There were material things that we were able to just exchange because of that's how it was, but we knew on our way to school, we had to go pick up this person. We then had to go to another spot. We then had to make sure, if you're not going to make it to school today, if you're not going to be on time today, please let me know. I'll find a different route. But there was a sense of like community, especially as we went to school and walked to school together. All right. So I had to go pick up my boy. Me and Emilio stopped by my house. Then we went to our friend Alize's house. Then we would go to our middle school together. And then from home, we knew that the whole group had to wait for each other. We dropped one friend off, dropped me off. The others walked across the bridge together just to make sure everybody got home safely. But there was a sense of community accountability that just having a neighborhood school really, really built. It was a function that kept everybody accountable, kept us in communication, but also like made sure that there was safety in a sense too. And there was accountability in a sense. It was so interesting, just like reflecting back on the benefits of going to a neighborhood school, because then I knew on my way to school I was going to see my uncle RW. I knew that my friend's grandma was always looking out for us. Like, oh, I didn't see you at school today. What does that mean? Or, neighbor, I knew like you normally leave the house at this time. Why didn't you leave the house at this time? Oh, are you dealing like all of that stuff was like natural. And so I was just like thinking around like why community is struggling today, or why it doesn't exist in the way that we want it to function. And I'm not saying like going to neighborhood schools is like the end all be all of like bringing community back, but it is something that I knew was like a routine of seeing these people in the morning, of understanding the kids. And you may not know your neighbor's name, but they did see you and you would just wave to them and say hello. And they knew that that was just part of the routine. And so there was something to say that was important around that. And then I think about as I'm getting older and thinking about friends and community care. And I think around, my friends, we did Friendsgiving from 10th grade on. So that was a running tradition for at least, 27 now? Had to be going strong for 7, 8, 9 years, And that was so important to us because we knew this was a dedicated time for us to all share a resource, be reflective, laugh, smile, drink, enjoy each other's company as we were getting older and had to make more intentional time as life was going to start lifing at some point in time. And so we got into that space, and I think around it now as an adult, and people make fun of me all the time. They're just like, Marquise, you're really just a neighborhood ass nigga. Like, you really just be walking around saying, hello, Mr. Jim. Hey, Miss Sheila. Hey, Mr. Darren. How you living? Da, 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 da. Like, why are you always like talking to these people? And for me, it was I don't know anything different. Like, I worry, and this might be why I'm like nervous around like if I ever have to go to a suburb and move there, because I'm just like, community just functions different in these neighborhoods, and it just throws me in a way that I don't like, right? I'm thinking around where I'm at in Philly now, and I do know my neighbors' names. The niggas on the stoop, the lady at the bodega, like all of them, I know their names. They have an idea of what I do, but there's just like a system that functions really well. If I don't see the niggas on the stoop, something's going wrong, right? That's an indicator that they're all good and they're just chilling and doing their normal routine. But when something is off, you know that something is off. right? Think about at the bodega, Claudie, she was really dope because when Philly, even recently, like Philly was going through, like we didn't know if the water was clean or not or how it was being filtered, X, Y, and Z. She had 2 gallons of water waiting for me. Like that is crazy to me. I'm walking down the street. My neighbor is talking to me, really dope. Yo, my kid's birthday's coming up. I know you don't know him like that, but it would be nice to have you come over, grab a drink, play a game of dominoes. Let's keep it pushing. Also, just asking life questions. He knew I was a teacher, so he's just like, my son's at this age right now. Do you know any resources? Can I do this? Easy. Walk down the street, see the neighbors cooking out. Yo, you getting a burger today? Yeah, I'm getting a burger. How you living? Boom, got the burger. I see Mr. Jim and Miss Sheila sitting on their porches, just talking, but I always know like to set aside at least 20 minutes to 30 minutes when I'm talking to specifically Mr. Jim. He tells me about his life growing up, what he is like going through, but also just like how I'm existing as a teacher, and him just being really happy to see like Black men staying in the neighborhood, right? Because he knows it's important to have consistency and anchors in a neighborhood, and what does that look like and what does that mean? And so he looks forward to seeing me. When it got super cold, I made sure to go check in on him and Miss Sheila, just in case like their pipes burst, or if they were safe, or if they were okay. And so just taking that extra level of care to people who in reality I'm not obligated to, but I do find value in like checking in on people. And like if you see them every single day, and if they are part of a routine, and if they are consistent, it's just simple courtesy that I just don't know if it exists anymore. And like I know this conversation, like I'm just kind of like reflecting on how I navigate, but it then does take me into a space of what does it look like to now build community in a world where there are digital communities, when they're in a world where even in a digital community, people are still living in echo chambers, and they can filter out what they want to hear, and they can hear if they don't agree with a different perspective, then it goes out. And I play into it, right? Like I don't want to hear a perspective that I think is particularly harmful. I don't want to have to engage with somebody that I don't align with and their fundamental beliefs in some things. Like I do have my non-negotiables that I'm just not wavering on, and I'd rather just not bring into a space. But I can also acknowledge the fact that even in there can be some harm of just like where I value other perspectives or an interrogation of perspective. There's also part of it where I'm just like, yeah, no, I'm actually like not engaged in a conversation of transphobia. I'm actually not engaged in a conversation of misogynoir. Like, I don't think that that's particularly valuable, and I don't think that is a perspective always worth hearing, because I do think on the other end of that is repetitive harm that I don't know if I'm always willing to engage. Now, I do recognize, like, you have to, like, engage in that to figure out, like, how do I mitigate this harm? And so holding them accountable at the same time. So I will become a space of the teacher rather than always having to listen in. And sometimes that's a very abrasive, because I'm just like, child, that was homophobic. Child, that's transphobic. Why are we still even engaging in this conversation? And are you willing to learn? And so having to find the ways to, like, engage with people that you disagree with or fundamentally, like, share a different value than you, and also holding space to, like, see them be able to change. And I think that's part of the thing that kind of got missing, especially with the advent of social media and, like, how we all have to navigate, which I think is what is also, like, causing extremes of, like, oh, if you're not this, then you're this. And it's a binary that should not exist, but it does, right? And so how do we get back to that space? And I think it is going back to human connection. Humans need other people who exist and have differences of opinion, but can still, like, find camaraderie. I don't agree with everything that my neighbor, Mr. Jim, says, but I do respect that he has a story to tell, and I do think that that story is worth telling, right? And I think it also adds into, like, okay, I can now understand how you got to that conclusion based on your life experiences, and now how do we bring this back in a way that can feel productive, or can we move this in a space that can push your thinking in a different kind of way? All of that, to me, plays a role, and it is very significant in how we have to navigate a lot of the time. So that to me is part of like this individual nature that we have in America. This keep stuff behind closed doors. This, well, if you don't believe me in this realm, then it is an affront to who you are. All of that stuff in particular does matter in the conversation of what it means to build intentional community. Now, with all of that, and now thinking around how I navigate with neighbors and thinking around how I navigate with friends, what does this look like to almost codify this? So, what does it look like for us? And I'm going to ask this in a series of questions, but what does it look like for us to be able to share resources? What does it look like for us not to be greedy and have to feel the need to take from somebody else rather than saying, yo, how do I add on to making your life easier? That to me is a cultural sense of knowing your neighbor, being able to engage with your neighbor, and being comfortable with not having something, but knowing somebody else can give you something of value, right? Or knowing how to exchange goods or exchange services in order to like maintain community, right? And I also think around it is like, what traditions are you creating? What community are you building so you can feel like you are accountable to somebody and you begin to build out norms in your community? What are things that we are absolutely all agreeing to? What are things that we are not tolerating? What are things that are like wavering and may have a just like there's opportunity to negotiate like what this looks like and how it manifests, right? All of that to me is going to be integral to building out community. It's also going to be a space of being intentional and showing that you care and building empathy and learning another person and taking time to get to know somebody, and then making sure that your life doesn't live in transaction. It takes a different level of effort. I do think that it requires today because we're all trying to just get by and survive. So do we always have time to get to know our neighbors? No. Is it always safe to know everybody, or do your interactions look different? I know my interactions look very different from my best friend's interactions because she has to navigate, are these niggas problematic? Are these people misogynist? Are they going to try and holler at me when I don't want no business, right? I don't have to experience that as a brown skinned 6'2" black man, right? I don't. And so I do also think around this fear of other people. There's a fear that I think is also pervasive, and because it's a fear of the unknown, when you don't know what's on the other side of something and you don't know how somebody's going to act, all I have to know is that my previous interactions have told me that this person's probably not going to be safe, or I have to think twice around engaging with this person, which is very real. I do that with white people. Child, I don't know you and I don't know what you're about, but I do know that there's potential for you to cause harm in a way that's just not going to feel good, in a way that I'm going to have to navigate and mitigate, and knowing how to set that boundary with you before you even have a chance to do it. Right? And so it's just like difficult because you always have like these conflicting opinions and like these different pieces of intersectionality that go into how we exist and how we navigate and what we know of the world versus what we experience in the world, and then our perception of the world, and all of that lives in a space of wanting to just be safe, not be harmed, not be not have to like take a chance on somebody else's humanity. And so it's just very human nature in that regard. So I do think that social media plays a role into it. I do think that the way that we frame conversations has a way to do with it, and how we live in echo chambers has a way to do with it. So I do think around, as we are engaging and building intentional community, how do you treat your friends? How do you function in that friend group? What do you and your friends do? And now can you extend that to other people? I'm not saying in a space of vulnerability, but I am saying in a space of like care for another human and being able to show up with the best intentions consistently, right? I think that is the piece. Understanding, listening, acknowledging, pivoting, adjusting, all of the stuff that I too do not like to always have to engage in, but I do know that there is beauty on the other side of that, humanity on the other side of that. And so as I think around how I show up in friendships, with checking in on people and talking and making time for conversation and knowing there's moments of disagreement and knowing that I'm going to mess up at some point in time is also so crucial as we are going to continue to develop what this thing looks like, what our community starts to look like, and ultimately further down the line, this is what political organizing can look like. This is what it looks like when somebody may appoint a leader to be able to go speak for them in city council and really able to understand like what are the true needs of each community that are different and how to properly show up for them and knowing what this means moving forward. So I do think that there is a social, political, and economic gain to also building intentional community because this causes a little less conflict within. And now we're all able to have like a united front on when somebody enters our space or when somebody's making a decision on behalf of us. How do we know if it's with the best intention and are these spaces heard all the time? So once again, I do think on this reflection, it really just made me, one, appreciate my upbringing a little bit more, but also recognizing like, ooh, how can I start also adding into this context of Philly, where I've been living in this apartment for the last 4 years now, 3.5, 4 in August, and it feeling like I'm just building community. It feels like I'm just like being more intentional around this within the last year and feeling like I have a space to engage in politics because I understand it a little bit more, engaging in the neighborhood politics too, but also building up that relationship that the lady at the bodega is able to still like, yo, you good? How you doing? How's teaching? You need to take a break. What's that look like? The guys on the stoop are also just like, yo, when I got stopped by the cops, that's not him. He's good people. Please don't bother him. That all is community care. What does it look like for us to do that? And how do you take that to the next step? And so my call to y'all, have a cup of coffee with your neighbor. Walk by your neighbor. Say hello, say good morning, whatever the case may be. Whatever that is, do that with one person. Stay consistent, take walks, explore your neighborhood, see the differences, smile, engage. All of that stuff does matter. Do it to the space that feels safe enough for you to be able to engage in that. But I do think that you're going to find community showing up for you in a very different way and wanting to show up for you. I do still believe that humans are good. I still believe that there is a very unique space of being in Philly and more of the urban neighborhoods and the hoods that really allow us to stay together. And that's not me saying with the rosy colored glasses because violence is still happening. All of this stuff is happening. But I do think that controlling your immediate neighborhood and extending that and seeing how they function is a beautiful opportunity for us to really think around care differently and thinking around how we show up in our friends and how that can be codified or translated to the rest of these strangers. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation over this cup of coffee. Let me know and engage with me. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Share, tweet me at Marquise Davon across all social media. Tell a friend to tell a friend. What cup of coffee are you having this morning? Please let me know. I appreciate you. I so look forward to seeing y'all next week. Peace.